Welcome back to another episode of Lush Life, No Labels, a podcast where I talk about the struggles and joys of self improvement, anywhere from relationships, career, wellness, and more. I'm Fatu. I have a very special guest joining me on today's episode. Her name is Angela. Angela is one of my partners in crime from college, so we have known each other for a very long time. She is a family nurse practitioner navigating the crazy healthcare system in this dear country we all call home. She currently lives in Seattle and enjoys getting into nature and listening to music when she's not constantly charting. So, Angela, welcome to this podcast.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Yes, thanks for joining us. I have you on this podcast, and the title, the listeners will see that the title is basically Dirty 30, so I think they can guess what we'll talk about today. But really, the
Yeah.
story of the week is around turning the age of 30, which is a big deal in the US at least. Angela, do you want to tell us a story about turning 30?
Yeah. So I feel like, 30s, I've always been a big birthday person. And, 30 is you're starting a new decade of life. And, um, so my birthday is December 21st. And I love that birthday because, I live in Seattle, but originally I'm from Philly, and a lot of my family is still home and my friends are still there. So I get to celebrate my birthday before I leave for the holidays. And then also when I get back to where I grew up and seeing all my family and my home friends. So I had two different birthdays for my 30th
I
because
love
why
that.
not?
Why not?
Yeah. For my Seattle birthday, there's this place called Orient Express. It's like this restaurant, karaoke bar. They have Thai food and bartenders and stuff. So I pretty much rented out the whole place and then got a friend of mine to DJ. There were bartenders and everything. And the theme, since I'm 30. I grew up in the 2000s. So the theme was disco 2000s. So it was basically like all 2000s music, but people had to dress in like either disco gear from like the 70s or 2000s. And so I feel like a lot of people went all out and music was a lot of fun. The place was a lot of fun. We got to decorate a lot. Had a really, really good time. I was just surrounded by a lot of people that I love. And it was really cool to see kind of the community that I've built for myself in Seattle. When I first moved here, I only knew like one or two people, and then just kind of how that has expanded in the time I've lived here was really fulfilling and made my heart happy. So that was the Seattle birthday and had a lot of fun.
You had a 2000s party, so very on brand.
I know, right? Yeah. I'm like kind of right at the cutoff because I was born in 94. It was a good time. And then my home birthday, I went home, and every year my friend Mary and I, we my birthday is the 21st, her birthday is the 22nd. So we always have like a joint birthday, and it's usually at my house, and my family's there and they get to check in and say hi with all my friends. And we typically do like a bonfire. And that was an especially cool birthday because, I had people from when I was in third grade, like one of my closest friends from third grade, Kim, and then a lot of friends of mine from high school, a couple friends from college, Ellen came, and I also had a friend that I met in Seattle, but she's actually from Philly and moved back. And she also got to come. I was reflecting on it kind of before the party happened. And it was just like multiple different chapters of my life, all kind of in one place. And that was exactly what I wanted it to be. And it felt really nice.
Hmm. I love that. And you mentioned how you're generally a birthday person as well. And so
Definitely.
even having your birthday around the holidays, I'm sure it's like people have time off. There's always that positivity around that as well, which I think is great. And specifically with turning 30, it is a milestone, at least in the US. And I find that when people turn 30 or around that time, there's a lot of reflection, maybe some pressure and some growth
Yeah.
as well that comes along with that. So I definitely am curious to hear your thoughts on that and how you were feeling around that birthday. And you mentioned, yep, you're 94. I also 94. I turned 30 a few months before you. So I sort of went through my similar thing as well around 30. I was actually pretty excited to turn 30. Definitely curious to hear how you feel about that. You're 30 now, but before you were 30, what was the first word that came to mind when you thought about turning 30?
Oh, that's a good question. Growth is something I thought a lot about. I remember on my actual birthday, I'm not like a huge journaler, but I try to journal from time to time, and
Hmm.
especially on big days like that. And so I just remember thinking about kind of the past and the future at the same time, and kind of reflecting on the past decade of my life and kind of all of the things that I've accomplished and how I've grown as a person and working towards some of these goals that I've set for myself when I was way younger. And then I also at the same time think about what's to come and all the growth that I will continue doing. Reflecting on the past decade, I feel like the 20s for me were a lot of fun. I was graduating from college, and it's funny, I feel like a lot of people say they grow a significant amount in college, but I feel like I actually grew much more after college because I went close by to home.
Mm.
But I feel like I moved across the entire country and it was really scary. And something I remember thinking at the time was I could hate it, I could love it, but I know that I would really regret not trying it. And who knows where it will take me in life, but it just feels like something that I want to do. I'm so happy I did make the move and become my own person and create my own community here, and yeah, work on being independent. And yeah, I had some pretty crazy stuff when I first moved out here, just in terms of housing and starting a new job as a nurse. And yeah, and I'm proud of myself for doing that back in my early 20s. And I reflect on going through COVID in the middle of our
Yeah.
families.
And having
And
to go to the hospital, I can't imagine what that was like for you. I think,
yeah,
I don't know what my listeners do, but I'm sure not everyone is in the hospital. So I'm sure that was certainly a trying time as well for you.
it definitely, yeah. And just being at a phase of life when you're supposed to be kind of carefree and just kind of living life.
Mhm.
And it's interesting because I feel like a lot of friends or people I knew, I feel like the pandemic, either they kind of fast forwarded the aging process for, or they kind of rewound it. And so, as I turned 30, just kind of reflecting on, I feel like once COVID kind of ended, or, didn't end, but once the vaccines came out, I feel like I certainly was like, all right, time to make the most of everything and go out and do all these things that I wasn't able to do because I felt like I was kind of gypped of time, I guess, like in my mid 20s. And now that I'm hitting 30, it feels like okay, like I'm ready to make some changes. That I've lived life in the 20s, I've gone out, I feel like I've traveled a lot, explored a lot, and many of those things I do want to carry into my 30s still, but also with a more mature lens. And intentionality, I guess, is something that I've also focused on.
Mhm.
So I guess that could also be a word in the end of my 29th year of life and going into 30.
That's great. And I agree with both of those, the growth aspect and the intentionality piece. I've talked about it on this podcast before, but my early 20s was a mess. Most of it was a mess. I think when COVID hit is when, of course, the world stopped, but that was sort of the beginning of my growth, if I were to call it that.
Yeah,
Trying to figure out myself, which took years, of course. I'm still on that journey, but
totally.
as I also turned 30, I was excited because I heard other people talking about, oh, when you're 30, you really know yourself and you really know what you want to do. Not saying that you have to know exactly what you want to do, but I was excited to step more into being an adult and step more into being
Yeah,
myself. But to your point too about some of the things that you were doing that you want to keep carrying forward, like traveling, that type of thing. My late 20s also cemented for me that those are some things that I know I want to be part of my future that I actually
Yeah.
didn't do as much before in my early 20s. I really started doing that more in my late 20s, but I agree with that growth. I feel like I had a huge mindset shift as well. And the excitement of being 30, at least for me, helped me be 30 maybe a little
Yeah.
bit. So,
What do you
mhm.
Oh, I was gonna ask, what do you feel like is one of the biggest growth points of your 20s and bringing into your 30s? Am I
Mm.
allowed to ask questions on here?
Yes, you can ask.
Okay,
It's just a
cool.
conversation. That's a really great question. For me, I feel like there were so many things that I was struggling with. The first thing that comes to mind for me is my anxiety. I don't think I realized how anxious I used to be until I
Mm,
became less anxious. And then I was like, wow, I was like trapped in my head for a long time.
yeah.
I just didn't realize. For me, it was basically getting more clarity by being less anxious. It's not that I'm not anxious at all now, but I'm much better at it. And so it's really getting more clarity around life. I think once I was less anxious, then I could build boundaries, which was a huge thing that I could not do before. I could figure out what actually makes me happy. What is it that I really want to do versus was I just doing this because of society? So really my anxiety is the
Mhm.
biggest thing. Being less anxious is I think the big mindset change that happened for me.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
That's great.
That was a great question. I actually haven't thought about that. So, getting back to you, I know you talked about your 20s and in some in reflecting as well in your 20s. Was there, I'm curious, one habit or mindset you let go of before stepping into your 30s?
Ooh, I don't know that I necessarily let go of anything, but I think something that I did, I feel like I started doing something that I hadn't previously done. My 29th year of life, and I started doing this maybe a couple months before I turned 30, but when I was in my residency for nurse practitioner, there were a lot of other big things that happened in my life that were pretty rough, and the 29th year of life was not a good year for me for many reasons. But I think after the residency ended and going into kind of the first year of being independent, I had a week off, and I like to hike and I like to get out into the mountains, and obviously I was doing all of that in my week off. And one of my closest friends, Dina, was like, that's great that you're hiking, and that's great that you're, getting out and doing things that you enjoy, but I would recommend you also take this time to reflect on the past year of your life, because obviously it's been a tough one for many of us, and I would recommend you just kind of also just process the past year a bit. And so something that I've started doing is, I mentioned I journal sometimes. I think I am also setting boundaries is something that's hard for me to do. And in this spirit of intentionality, kind of going into my first year practicing independently as a nurse practitioner, I wanted to make sure I was doing my job to the best of my abilities, but also living my life outside of my job in a way that felt better than it did during residency. So what I started doing is I kind of made a checklist of 8 things at the back of my journal, and they're kind of related to like nutrition, activity, future goals. Are you paying attention to your own wants and needs? Are you spending time in nature? Do you feel happy? Do you feel content? And so the goal for this year is each week going through each of those 8 things and reflecting, am I doing this? Am I not doing this? Could I be better at doing this? And when you do it every week, and that's kind of the goal, I have been better some weeks than others, but it is something that I have been consistently doing since October of this past year. But it is interesting when you do that check-in and you write it down, you do start to see patterns in things. Yeah, that I feel like that's something that I've really enjoyed doing. And then I'll also write a little blurb for the week, like how I was feeling, bad things that happened, good things that happen, where I'm at in my headspace. And before I start writing the next week, I'll always reread the previous week just to kind of reflect on like, where was I at? And where am I now? Yeah, I feel like that is something that I've done for myself. And I feel like it's a good thing, and the intentionality piece. And I definitely want to continue doing it. And it's cool to just open up to past snippets of your life and be able to read exactly what you were feeling and exactly what you thought in that present moment, but to be able to look back to the past and do that.
Yeah, that's great. And that's really one of the positives of journaling. I have a few other friends who also journal. I think I've tried it in the past, but to your point about having to read the week before, especially in the past when it's like, oh, my week before wasn't so great. I feel like I would in the past just shy away from that because I didn't want to face that again. So it's tough what
Totally.
you're doing, right? It's intentional, like you said, and I think it's a really great practice because you do face that, whether it's positive or negative, but then you have a fresh new week ahead of you. That could be its own thing too. So it's not that every week is the same thing, but I'm glad that that's working for you because that's a real tangible thing that you have been doing for yourself. And I'm glad that it's something that you've been consistent with as well.
Yeah, because I think in terms of like the boundaries and stuff like that, I'm really good at not setting clear boundaries. And so, I knew kind of my 29th year of life was definitely really rough and not what I necessarily want my 30th year of life and moving forward to be. And so I thought, well, how can I prevent this from happening again or prevent where my headspace is? And so setting objective measures and goals, again, obviously there's subjectivity in all of it, but just having like a visual representation of that and checking in consistently with myself and taking the time to be like, how am I doing? Am I meeting these things? Am I not meeting these things? Do I feel like these things are a good measurement in general? So I feel like it's a good objective way to check in, because it's easy to push boundaries if they don't exist. But if you create something for yourself, and I kind of had criteria for like, if I'm not meeting at least half of the 8 things each week for a period of 2 months, that is a sign to me that something needs to change pretty drastically.
Yeah.
So kind of like a SMART goal, we talked about in college or whatever.
Yes, throwback to SMART goals.
Throwback to
It's
SMART goals.
it's a great way, like you said, to keep checking in with yourself. And hopefully, too, there's not too much pressure. I mean, of course, you have a goal of being consistent with it, but because it's something for you, made by you, that's nice as well that it has that personal touch to it as well.
Exactly. And I give myself grace, right? I'm like, I don't do it every week. It is what it is. I'm doing more than I would do otherwise.
Mhm.
So
Yeah, that's me with this podcast is I was like, oh, I'm going to try to do it every week, which I think I've been pretty good with. But if there's a week where I don't do it, then it is what it is. It's
totally.
nice that we still have those types of goals for ourselves. So you
Yeah.
talked about obviously reflected on your 20s and then moving into the 30s and this the journaling that you've started. What's one joyful thing that has come from being 30 so far?
Ooh, I think I just feel like people in their 30s, when I was talking about 30, they would always tell me it's like you have a better understanding of who you are as a person, but you're still young. You're more financially stable, hopefully. and obviously we're consistently figuring out who we are as people, and we're constantly changing as people too. Obviously, like the adolescent years, your brain's developing. I feel like your 20s are like, I'm newly independent and I'm kind of like trying to figure things out and maybe slogging through it, or maybe a bit of a hot mess through it, but it's chaotic in a
Yep.
hopefully good way. But yeah, I feel like the 30s are kind of that point where you're like, okay, like I have some experience in being a young adult at this point, and I'm kind of transitioning from a young adult to like an actual adult,
Which is still weird.
which is still weird. And yeah, one thing that I've reflected on when turning 30 is like, I don't know, I feel like when I was younger, I would always look at adults and I'd be like, wow, they have their shit together. Like
Oh, they
when
know
I'm
everything. They know what they're doing.
right, right. When I'm that age, definitely realizing that that's absolutely not the case. But we do what we can, and we work on figuring out what our goals in life are. And the other thing that I've reflected on or started to think about as I turn 30s. I'm 30 now, and me going from my 20s to my 30s, like that means that a lot of people that I care about in my life are also getting older. And I think that is something else that I reflect on. And my family, and I definitely have had friends that are my age with new freak medical diagnoses. And it's weird because it's like you're young, but you're also more aware of mortality at the same time.
Yes, that's for sure. Yeah, that's a real thing. And even things like, oh, friends are getting married, friends are having children, which to me is
Totally.
still crazy because like you were saying, we're adults now, but we're sort of we're still on that growth process. But to your point, yeah, we really do start seeing life more from the lens of getting older. Even things around, I mean, I'm online a lot, even things like skincare or aging in the world that we live in, right? Those types of things. So it's definitely an interesting place to be because now I do feel like an actual adult. And in terms of even goals, yeah, we all have those goals. But for me, I think when I turned 30, I kind of was like, I don't think I have one life goal per se. I have so many things that I'm interested in. And
Mm-hmm.
some things I try and it works and I like it, great. Some things don't work out. And that's just the reality of life. And as I've become 30, you just know that that's just what it is. You deal with it. You try to deal
Right.
with it, you try to move on. Some things, of course, are really difficult though, and that's very real. Whether it's in our personal lives or someone else that we know who's struggling with something, but
Yeah.
it certainly is something where we do face those types of challenges. And there are, like you said, new challenges that we didn't really encounter or didn't have to think about as much when we were in our 20s or younger that now have become very, very real. Even
Yeah.
me, my 401k, like those types of things. And when I talk to them, they're like, hey, we noticed you don't have a beneficiary. And I'm like, am I supposed to be doing that right now? And then I was like, wait, but if I'm unmarried and have no kids, like, do I need a living will? Like, these are things that I've never
Totally.
thought about before. But now I'm thinking about it.
Totally.
I'm like, wait, oh, I guess this is a thing that now people are asking me about that they would not have asked me in my 20s. So that's something new that I recently encountered that it was just out of left field. So
Yeah.
I'm sure there are a bunch of other things that'll pop up as we get through this.
Totally. I feel
But
like visually, like I'm a big Pixar movie fan, and
Mhm.
have you seen The Incredibles?
I love The Incredibles.
I feel like I picture the 20s being the teenage girl, and she has that like shield around her.
Oh yeah,
I
Violet,
feel like yeah, I feel like
daughter.
the 20s, I picture Violet with the shield. It's like, you can go out and drink as much as you want and feel fine the next day, and you can like, not stretch and be fine, and you can function on like very minimal sleep, all things that I have done. And I feel like the 30s is like that shield kind of like disappears.
So you're gonna wake up and something you're gonna be in your back, your neck, something. So you better start
Literally, I feel
stretching
like the
daily.
day I turned 30, I feel like the next day I had low back pain, and I was like, here we
Oh
go.
no. Yeah, literally one of those things that pops up, like you said, the aging aspect of things too. Which is crazy, right? So there are so many of these different types of things that we start going through. But I guess one question too that I have is, do you feel like your definition of success or happiness has changed?
Oh, that's a good question. I think it's evolved, definitely. Definitely. I think partly also, I think my um growing up in the East Coast my entire life and going to college on the East Coast and then moving out to the West Coast, I definitely noticed a bit of a shift. And yeah, because I feel like when I was younger and in college, it was just like constantly on the grind and like, I need to get really good grades. And if I don't get good grades, like I'm not gonna get a good job. Like it was all just success focused, I guess. And then I feel like I correlated success with happiness. I was like, oh, if I get good grades or if I get a good job, like that will make me happy. And I think kind of moving out to the West Coast and the older that I get, I kind of realize obviously a career is a part of life. And you, if you're passionate about your career, that's great. It's not your entire life. It's like you want to have your career or not, you know, whatever floats your boat, but you also want to be a person outside of whatever your day-to-day job is.
Mhm.
And I feel like that's something I've kind of reflected a lot more on, and just also figuring out like what do I actually want and what
Passionate
actually makes
life.
me happy rather than like what do other people want for me or how do I please other people or whatever. So I think it's definitely evolved a lot.
Yeah. No, that's a good question, and I think that's the question of life, right? Even for the listeners, what do I want? For sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that's actually a really great way for us to wrap up the episode for today. But do you have any final words or thoughts for our listeners? We have most of the listeners are in the US, but I also have international listeners as well.
Wow, look at you, Fatu.
So yeah, do you have
Wow.
any words for the folks who are listening in today?
Yeah, I think just intentionality is something that I have really come to reflect on a lot. And at the end of the day, whether you're turning 30, turning 18, turning 45, we really never know how long we're going to be on this earth, and just really making the most of each day. And I think it's easy when you're younger in your 20s to be like, if you do set goals for yourself and like pushing them off or whatever and being like, oh, I'll do that when blah, blah, blah. I'll do that when blah, blah, blah. If it's something you want to do and it's important to you, age shouldn't be a number. You should do it because each day is a privilege to have. And hopefully we have many, many days, but that's never a certainty. And that's something that I've definitely realized in my late 20s going into my 30s. So taking intentionality into each day and valuing each day is, I guess, what I would leave on.
That's a great note to leave on. Thank you so much, Angela, for joining me today on this here podcast. And thank you to my listeners for continuing to listen into Lush Life No Labels. Cheers to your lush life and see you later.
Thanks for having me.
Of course.